She thought her day was ruined when a stranger spilled coffee all over her white dress. She had no idea that this accident would change her entire life. This story was created and written by the author of this channel. Emma Harper woke up already late, which felt deeply personal, as if the alarm clock had made a deliberate decision to betray her on the most important morning of her life. She sat up too fast, tangled herself in the sheets, and immediately knew that the universe was not on her side today. Still, she refused to panic. Panic was for people without backup plans, and Emma had a very good one: confidence, caffeine, and a white dress that made her feel unstoppable. The dress was perfect. It fit exactly the way it was supposed to, the kind of fit that made you stand a little straighter and believe your life might actually be under control. Emma looked at herself in the mirror and practiced a calm smile, the kind meant for serious people who asked serious interview questions. She reminded herself that this interview mattered more than anything she had done before, that it could change everything, and that she absolutely could not mess it up. She rushed out of the apartment, nearly forgetting her bag, nearly locking herself out, and very nearly tripping down the stairs. Outside, the city moved too fast and too slow at the same time. Everyone had somewhere to be, and Emma was convinced she was the only one running late for destiny. She stopped at a coffee stand, ordered her usual, and took the first sip like it was a protective spell against bad luck. It did not work. The collision happened so suddenly that her brain failed to process it at first. 1 second she was stepping forward, rehearsing answers in her head, and the next she was stumbling backward as hot coffee lifted into the air in what felt like slow motion. The splash landed directly on her dress, spreading like a cruel joke across the fabric. Emma froze, staring down at the stain in disbelief, her heart dropping somewhere near her shoes. The man who had crashed into her looked just as shocked. He was tall, with brown hair that clearly belonged to someone who had meetings instead of mornings like this, and blue eyes that widened in pure horror. His suit was expensive, his posture apologetic, and his expression so lost that for half a second Emma almost felt sorry for him. Almost. "Are you serious?" she demanded, lifting her arms slightly as if the stain might disappear if she stopped touching it. "Do you have any idea what you just did?" He started apologizing immediately, words tumbling over each other, as if speed alone could undo the damage. He offered napkins, then his jacket, then a look of panic so genuine it might have been impressive under different circumstances. Emma barely heard him. All she could see was the ruined dress, the ticking clock in her mind, and the interview she had been walking toward with so much hope only minutes earlier. She took a step back, her voice tight with frustration and disbelief, and told him that apologies were not enough when timing, luck, and gravity teamed up against you. Then she turned and walked away, heart racing, dress stained, and morning officially destroyed, unaware that this was not the end of the disaster, but the very beginning of something she could never have planned for. This story was created and written by the author of this channel. Emma did not stop walking until the corner was far behind her and the coffee stand was nothing more than a blurry memory. Her heart was still racing, partly from anger and partly from the growing realization that her carefully planned morning had collapsed in less than 10 seconds. She glanced down at the stain again, hoping it might somehow have faded while she wasn't looking, but it remained there, dark and unforgiving, a clear reminder that optimism was not enough to survive real life. She muttered a few words under her breath that would not have impressed any future employer, and checked the time on her phone. There was no way she could walk into an interview looking like this, not when first impressions mattered so much. The white dress, which had given her confidence only minutes earlier, now felt like a personal insult. Emma slowed her pace, trying to breathe, trying to convince herself that this was not the end of everything she had worked toward. Behind her, the man stood frozen for several seconds before finally moving. Daniel Crawford had never collided with a stranger in his life, and certainly never with someone holding hot coffee and a dream on her schedule. He watched her walk away, feeling a sharp, unfamiliar discomfort in his chest. His suit sleeve was damp, his mind completely blank, and for the first time that morning, he had absolutely no idea what he was supposed to do next. Daniel was used to control. His days were planned down to the minute, his meetings followed strict agendas, and even his spontaneous decisions had backup options. This moment had none of that. He had been distracted by a phone call, thinking about a board meeting, and now he was standing on a sidewalk holding napkins he didn't need while a woman he had just knocked off balance disappeared into the crowd. He shook his head, annoyed with himself, and continued on his way, though his usual confidence had been replaced by something closer to unease. The city felt louder, sharper, as if it were mocking him for thinking he could move through it without consequences. He told himself the incident was over, that it was nothing more than an unfortunate accident, and that by lunchtime he would have forgotten about it. He was wrong. Emma rushed back to her apartment, changed into the first outfit that looked even remotely professional, and stared at herself in the mirror with frustration. She looked fine, technically, but she didn't feel ready anymore. The stain, the collision, the stranger's apologetic face all replayed in her mind as she grabbed her bag and headed out again, determination forcing her forward even as doubt followed closely behind. Neither of them knew it yet, but that brief, chaotic moment on the sidewalk had already altered the course of their day, their plans, and eventually their lives, proving that sometimes the most important turning points arrive disguised as accidents you wish had never happened. Emma arrived at the interview building 10 minutes early, which under normal circumstances would have made her feel accomplished and responsible. Today, it only made her feel suspicious, as if being early was the calm before another disaster she had not yet earned. She stood in the lobby, smoothing imaginary wrinkles on her borrowed blazer, replaying the morning in her head and trying very hard not to imagine coffee stains appearing out of nowhere out of pure spite. She checked her reflection in the glass doors and nodded at herself with forced confidence. The outfit was fine. Not the dress, but fine. She looked like a woman who could answer questions about teamwork and problem-solving without crying. That would have to be enough. Still, her mind kept drifting back to the man with the blue eyes and the expensive suit, and she found herself mentally scolding him again, just in case he somehow deserved it retroactively. Upstairs, Daniel Crawford was having a very different kind of morning. His assistant had already asked him twice if he was feeling well, which was alarming, because nothing says something is wrong like concerned looks before noon. Daniel insisted he was fine, even though he had spent the last 15 minutes staring at a calendar reminder without reading it. His thoughts kept circling back to the woman in the white dress, the way she looked at him like he had personally declared war on her entire future. He adjusted his tie, stood up, sat back down, and then stood up again, which accomplished nothing except confusing his reflection. He told himself that he had important interviews today and that personal guilt over sidewalk collisions was not on the agenda. Still, when he glanced at the list of candidates and saw a familiar name near the top, he paused. Emma Harper. The name rang a bell, though he could not remember why. He shrugged it off and told himself it was a coincidence. The world was full of Emmas. Surely not all of them were on their way to life-changing interviews while being attacked by hot beverages. Back in the waiting room, Emma was doing what she did best when nervous, overthinking absolutely everything. She wondered if interviewers could sense bad mornings, if they had some internal radar that detected spilled coffee and emotional instability. She rehearsed answers in her head and immediately hated all of them. At one point, she accidentally nodded at another candidate who was clearly not seeking human interaction, which made her feel like she had already failed socially. When her name was finally called, she stood up so quickly that her chair made a loud scraping sound, which felt unnecessary and rude. She apologized to no one in particular and followed the assistant down the hallway, reminding herself to smile, breathe, and not mention coffee under any circumstances. The door opened. Emma took one step inside and stopped so abruptly that the assistant nearly walked into her. Behind the desk sat the man from the sidewalk. Daniel looked up, confident and composed, and then his entire expression collapsed in real time. His professional smile froze, rebooted, and shut down completely. For a split second, either of them moved. It was the kind of silence that deserved background music. "You," Emma said flatly. Daniel blinked. "You." If awkwardness were a physical object, it would have been pacing the room. The assistant, blissfully unaware of the emotional case she had unleashed, smiled politely and left them alone. The door closed with a soft click that sounded suspiciously like destiny laughing. Emma crossed her arms. "So this is where you work?" Daniel cleared his throat. "Yes. And you are here." "I noticed," she replied. "I usually don't meet company leadership by being knocked over like a bowling pin." "I didn't knock you over," he said automatically. Then paused. "Okay, I did, but not intentionally." She raised an eyebrow. "That's comforting." Daniel ran a hand through his hair, the same hair she had briefly considered pulling earlier that morning. "I owe you an apology. Again. Possibly several." "You owe me a new dress," Emma said. "And about 4 hours of emotional stability." Despite himself, Daniel laughed, then immediately stopped when he realized laughing might not be wise. "I swear," he said carefully, "this is not how I usually meet candidates." "That makes one of us," she replied. They stared at each other for a moment longer before Emma sighed. "Well," she said, straightening her posture, "are we doing this interview, or should I spill water on you to make us even?" Daniel smiled, genuinely this time. "Let's start with the interview." And just like that, the worst morning of Emma's life officially became the strangest interview either of them had ever experienced. The interview began with both of them pretending, very badly, that the morning collision had not happened. Daniel sat straight behind the desk, hands folded, expression carefully neutral, like a man attempting to convince the universe he was still in control. Emma sat across from him, spine rigid, smile polite in the way people smile when they are one sentence away from saying something reckless. Daniel cleared his throat and glanced at her resume, which he had already read twice without absorbing a single word. "So, Emma," he began, adopting the calm tone of a man who usually terrified entire conference rooms, "tell me a little about yourself." She looked at him for a long second. "Would you like the version that starts after the coffee incident, or should we include the emotional trauma?" He closed his eyes briefly. "Let's start professionally." "Great," she said, nodding. "I am punctual, hardworking, adaptable, and generally avoid being tackled by strangers before interviews." Despite every instinct telling him not to, Daniel smiled. He stopped himself, coughed, and tried again. "Your experience is impressive. You've worked in 3 companies in 5 years. "Yes," Emma replied. "I like growth. And rent." He nodded, making a note he did not need to make, mostly to keep his hands busy. "And how do you handle stressful situations?" She tilted her head thoughtfully. "Well, when life throws hot coffee at me, I usually scream internally, improvise externally, and continue moving forward." "That's honest," he said. She smiled sweetly. "You asked?" The questions continued, each one more normal than the last, which somehow made the situation funnier. Daniel asked about teamwork, leadership, problem-solving, and long-term goals, all while his brain occasionally replayed the moment coffee had flown through the air like a dramatic slow-motion betrayal. Emma answered confidently, occasionally gesturing with her hands, once nearly knocking over a pen, which caused both of them to freeze until it was clear no liquids were involved. At one point Daniel asked, "Where do you see yourself in 5 years?" Emma paused. "Ideally employed." possibly promoted. Hopefully not holding coffee near busy sidewalks. He laughed. Properly this time. Then immediately straightened his posture again. Apologies. No, please, she said. Laughing helps me forget that you ruined my dress. I did not ruin it, he said defensively. I contributed to its evolution. She snorted before she could stop herself, then covered her mouth. Sorry. Don't apologize, he said quickly. I'm enjoying this more than I should. The silence that followed was different. Lighter. Less tense. Almost comfortable, which was alarming for both of them. Daniel glanced at the clock and realized, with mild horror, that the interview had gone far longer than scheduled. He should have wrapped it up 10 minutes ago. Instead, he found himself asking questions he didn't usually ask, listening more closely than required, and noticing details that had nothing to do with qualifications. Emma, meanwhile, noticed that the intimidating CEO everyone feared had a habit of tapping his pen when nervous and that his serious expression cracked far too easily. She also noticed that she no longer felt like she was being judged. She felt like she was being seen, which was far more unsettling. When the interview finally ended, Daniel closed the folder and looked at her seriously. Emma, he said, this has been unconventional. That's one word for it, she agreed. But, he continued, you handled yourself with intelligence, humor, and composure under pressure. Which is more than I can say for myself this morning. She raised an eyebrow. So, is that a yes? He hesitated just long enough to be dramatic. It's a very strong yes. Emma blinked. Then blinked again. You're serious? Completely, he said. Though I understand if you need time to process the fact that your future employer owes you a dress. She laughed, relief washing over her in a way she hadn't expected. I'll think about forgiving you. Fair, he said. Take your time. As she stood to leave, they shared a brief, awkward pause, the kind that suggested something unfinished. Emma adjusted her bag and looked at him. Next time, she said, watch where you're going. Daniel smiled. Next time, he replied, I'll bring napkins. She walked out feeling lighter than she had all morning, while Daniel remained seated, staring at the closed door and realizing that the worst accident of his day had somehow turned into the most unexpected highlight. Emma walked out of the building with a strange mix of emotions that refused to organize themselves into anything sensible. Relief came first, followed closely by disbelief, and then by the uncomfortable realization that she had just accepted a job offer from the man who had physically pushed her into one of the worst mornings of her life. She paused on the steps outside, letting the city noise wash over her, and laughed quietly to herself, because if she didn't laugh now, she might start questioning every decision she had made since waking up. Inside the building, Daniel remained seated far longer than necessary, staring at the closed door as if it might reopen and explain everything. He had conducted hundreds of interviews over the years, many of them dull, some impressive, and a few memorable for entirely wrong reasons. None of them had involved coffee, emotional whiplash, or a candidate who made him forget his carefully prepared list of questions. He leaned back in his chair, rubbed his temples, and accepted the uncomfortable truth that professionalism had not prepared him for this particular situation. Emma spent the rest of the day telling herself she would be calm. She failed repeatedly. She called her best friend, who screamed loud enough to cause concern from nearby pedestrians. She went home, hung up the stained white dress like a fallen hero, and stared at it for a long moment before deciding it deserved respect, not blame. The dress had done its job. It had survived destiny. Mostly. The next morning arrived with suspicious politeness. No alarms betrayed her. No buses were missed. Emma chose her outfit carefully, avoiding white fabrics like they were cursed. She stood in front of the mirror, took a deep breath, and reminded herself that she was capable, qualified, and absolutely not intimidated by a CEO with blue eyes and an unfortunate talent for collisions. Her first official day began with confusion. No one seemed prepared for her arrival, despite the fact that she had paperwork, an employee badge, and an email confirming her start date. She was directed to 3 different floors, introduced to 2 people with the same name, and given a tour that included a printer that only worked when threatened verbally. By the time she reached her desk, she felt like she had already earned a promotion just for surviving orientation. Daniel, meanwhile, was having an unusually difficult morning. His calendar was full, his inbox was relentless, and yet his attention kept drifting toward the hallway outside his office. He told himself it was coincidence. He told himself it was responsibility. He told himself a lot of things that sounded reasonable until they didn't. When he finally saw Emma through the glass wall, laughing awkwardly with someone from HR while holding a stack of folders, he felt an entirely inappropriate sense of relief. She looked focused, alert, and very much not furious, which he took as a positive sign. He considered waving, rejected the idea as unprofessional, and instead pretended to be deeply invested in his laptop. Their first real interaction as coworkers happened near the coffee machine, which felt dangerously symbolic. Emma was pouring herself a cup when Daniel appeared beside her, stopping just far enough away to avoid causing another incident. They both froze for a moment, silently acknowledging the potential threat. "I promise," he said carefully, "I am standing completely still." "Good," she replied. "I'm emotionally fragile around hot liquids." They shared a smile, small and cautious, like people stepping onto thin ice together. Daniel gestured toward the machine. "I've already warned it about you." "I appreciate the effort," she said. "I'd hate to lose another outfit." They stood there for a moment longer than necessary, either quite ready to leave, until someone behind them cleared their throat loudly. Emma stepped aside, Daniel did the same, and they moved on with their day, both aware that this was no longer just a funny story about spilled coffee. It was the beginning of something far more complicated, and neither of them was entirely sure whether to be excited or afraid. Emma quickly discovered that working in Daniel Crawford's company was nothing like she had imagined during the interview. For one thing, the building seemed to operate on an unspoken rule that no one actually knew what anyone else was doing, but everyone pretended very confidently that they did. Her first week passed in a blur of meetings that could have been emails that could have been ignored, and acronyms no one ever fully explained. She nodded a lot, took careful notes, and reminded herself that this was normal, even when it felt like she had accidentally joined a very polite cult. Daniel, on the other hand, was discovering that having Emma in the office was far more distracting than any board meeting had ever been. He told himself it was professional responsibility, that as CEO he naturally paid attention to new employees, especially ones he had personally hired. This explanation fell apart every time he caught himself wondering whether she had managed to avoid coffee disasters that morning, or whether she still hated his tie choices, which she had already criticized twice without hesitation. Their interactions became a careful dance of professionalism mixed with something neither of them wanted to name out loud. Daniel made a point of addressing Emma exactly like everyone else in meetings, which meant using her full name and a serious tone, even when she raised an eyebrow at him in a way that clearly said she remembered the sidewalk incident very well. Emma, for her part, worked hard, asked smart questions, and absolutely refused to treat him like a fragile authority figure, which confused and impressed him in equal measure. One afternoon, fate decided to test them again. Emma was carrying a stack of documents down the hallway, feeling productive and competent, when she saw Daniel approaching from the opposite direction. Their eyes met, and both of them slowed down instinctively, as if the corridor itself were suddenly dangerous terrain. They stopped several feet apart. "No coffee," Emma said cautiously. "None," Daniel replied, holding up his empty hands. "I've learned." They stepped past each other without incident, both exhaling in relief at the same time. A passing employee watched the exchange with visible confusion. Later that day, Daniel called Emma into his office for a discussion about a project. She entered confidently, took a seat, and waited. Daniel launched into an explanation about strategy, timelines, and expectations, speaking fluently and clearly, until he realized she was staring at him with an expression that suggested mild concern. "What?" he asked. "You're tapping your pen," she said. "That usually means you're nervous." He stopped immediately. "I don't get nervous." She smiled. "You do when you care." The words landed harder than she intended, and for a moment the room felt very quiet. Daniel cleared his throat and shifted the conversation back to work, but the comment lingered between them, uncomfortably honest and impossible to ignore. As the days went on, small moments like that multiplied. They exchanged jokes in passing, shared looks during meetings when someone said something ridiculous, and once found themselves laughing quietly in the elevator until the doors opened and forced them back into professional expressions. Neither of them crossed any lines, but both were becoming increasingly aware that those lines existed for a reason. One evening, as Emma packed up to leave, Daniel caught sight of her through the glass walls and felt a strange sense of disappointment when she headed toward the exit. He told himself it was concern for a team member working late hours. He told himself many things. Emma left the building that night smiling, not entirely sure why. She had wanted this job for so long, and now she had it. What she had not expected was that the man responsible for one of the worst mornings of her life would also be the reason her days felt unexpectedly lighter. Neither of them said it out loud yet, but both were starting to understand that this story was no longer just about spilled coffee. The problem with pretending nothing was happening was that eventually something always happened. In Emma's case, it happened on a Thursday afternoon when the office air conditioning failed and everyone collectively decided that mild chaos was preferable to silence. People gathered in hallways, complained dramatically, and used the situation as an excuse to abandon productivity with impressive enthusiasm. Emma was reviewing documents at her desk when Daniel appeared beside her, looking slightly less composed than usual. His suit jacket was off, his sleeves rolled up, and the expression on his face suggested that even millions could not convince an air conditioner to cooperate. "Facilities says it'll take an hour," he said. Emma looked up. "An hour in this heat?" "Yes." She nodded solemnly. "I see. This is how morale collapses." He smiled despite himself. "I was thinking we could move the team meeting to the conference room on the other side. It has windows that actually open." "That's revolutionary thinking," she said. "Careful, people will expect innovation now." They walked together down the hallway, a detail either of them commented on, though several employees noticed and immediately pretended not to. The meeting itself was productive in theory and completely derailed in practice. Someone brought up quarterly numbers, someone else brought up the temperature, and at least one person suggested working from home forever as a long-term solution. Emma contributed calmly, confidently, and with just enough humor to keep the room engaged. Daniel watched her more than he should have, struck by how naturally she commanded attention without demanding it. This was not the woman he had collided with on the sidewalk in a moment of chaos. This was someone fully in her element, and the realization unsettled him in the best possible way. After the meeting, as people dispersed gratefully, Emma lingered to pack up her notes. Daniel remained as well, pretending to review something on the screen. "You handled that well," he said finally. "Heat brings out the truth," she replied. "Mostly complaints, but still." There was a pause, comfortable but loaded, the kind that suggested unfinished conversations waiting patiently in the background. Daniel leaned against the table, then straightened again, clearly debating something with himself. "Emma," he said carefully, "would you like to get a coffee sometime?" She looked at him, expression unreadable. Are you sure that's wise? He hesitated. Probably not. She smiled. In that case, yes. They agreed on a time and place with exaggerated professionalism, as if they were scheduling a board meeting rather than acknowledging mutual interest. When Emma left the room, Daniel remained behind, staring at the door with the unmistakable look of a man who had just agreed to something both terrifying and exciting. Word spread quickly. Too quickly. By the end of the day, Emma noticed curious glances and overly polite smiles from people who had never spoken to her before. She ignored them, focusing on her work and telling herself that a coffee was just a coffee. It meant nothing. It could remain harmless. Daniel spent the evening convincing himself of the same thing and failing spectacularly. The next morning arrived with nervous energy. Emma chose her outfit carefully, pausing in front of the mirror longer than usual. Daniel reviewed his schedule 3 times and still managed to forget where he had placed his phone. When they finally met in the lobby, both smiled a little too brightly and spoke a little too formally. The coffee shop was quiet, the atmosphere relaxed, and the drinks remained safely in their cups. They talked easily, laughing about office life, childhood stories, and the strange ways adulthood refused to make sense. Time passed unnoticed, and for once neither of them checked the clock. When they returned to work, something had changed. Not dramatically, not visibly, but enough to be felt. Their glances lingered longer. Their conversations carried an undercurrent neither could deny. The office remained the same, but the air between them did not. And somewhere between shared jokes and careful boundaries, both Emma and Daniel realized that the line they were trying so hard not to cross was becoming harder to see with every passing day. The moment they returned to the office after coffee, both Emma and Daniel made the same silent decision to act completely normal, which was ambitious and doomed from the start. They walked in separately, maintained a respectable distance, and greeted coworkers with professional smiles that were just a little too bright to be convincing. Anyone paying attention could feel that something had shifted, though no one could quite explain what it was. Emma sat at her desk and opened her laptop, determined to focus. She read the same paragraph 3 times without absorbing a single word, mostly because Daniel's laugh drifted from somewhere down the hallway, and her brain decided that this was now important information. She shook her head, scolded herself internally, and went back to work, only to be interrupted by an email notification. It was from Daniel. Subject: quick question. Message: do you prefer almond milk or regular? Emma stared at the screen for a full 10 seconds, then typed back: regular. Why? The reply came almost immediately. No reason. Just collecting data. She smiled despite herself, then quickly wiped the expression off her face when a coworker walked by. This was fine. Completely fine. CEOs were allowed to collect data. It probably meant nothing. It meant something. Later that afternoon, the company held an all-staff meeting, the kind that required everyone to sit still and pretend to be inspired. Emma took a seat near the middle, notebook ready, posture professional. Daniel stood at the front, composed and confident, delivering updates with his usual clarity. Halfway through, their eyes met, and he lost his place for exactly 2 seconds. No one else noticed. Emma did. She raised an eyebrow. He recovered smoothly, but the moment lingered like an inside joke neither of them dared to acknowledge. Emma wrote notes diligently, though one line simply read, "Stop looking at him." It did not help. After the meeting, as people slowly filtered out, Emma gathered her things when someone from HR approached her with an expression that was far too cheerful to be harmless. "So," the woman said lightly, "how are you settling in?" "Great," Emma replied honestly. "That's wonderful," the woman said. "We love initiative here." Emma nodded, unsure where this was going. "And professionalism," the woman added. Emma froze internally while maintaining an innocent expression. Of course. The woman smiled and walked away, leaving behind a subtle warning wrapped in corporate friendliness. Emma exhaled slowly and reminded herself that nothing inappropriate had happened. Coffee was allowed. Talking was allowed. Accidental eye contact was probably allowed. That evening, Emma stayed late to finish a project, unaware that Daniel was doing the exact same thing on the floor above her. When she finally stood up to leave, she nearly collided with him in the hallway, proving that fate still enjoyed repetition. Sorry, they said at the same time, then stopped. Daniel gestured toward the elevator. Heading out? Yes, she replied. Safely. With no beverages. Good, he said. I've developed a healthy fear. They rode the elevator down together in comfortable silence, the kind that felt natural rather than awkward. When the doors opened, either of them moved right away. This is complicated, Emma said softly. Yes, Daniel agreed. But not bad. She smiled. That's exactly the problem. They stepped out into the evening air, walking in opposite directions after a brief hesitation. Emma reached her car feeling lighter than she had in years, while Daniel stood watching the city lights, aware that the neat, predictable version of his life was officially slipping out of his control. Neither of them knew exactly what would happen next. They only knew that pretending nothing was happening was becoming harder every day, and for once, neither of them was entirely sure they wanted to stop it. By the 9th chapter of their shared chaos, the office had become a very observant organism. People noticed things. Too many things. Emma noticed it first in the way conversation stopped when she entered the break room, then restarted with suspicious enthusiasm the moment she left. Someone offered her coffee she hadn't asked for. Someone else asked, far too casually, whether she liked working close to leadership. She smiled, nodded, and mentally added a new item to her daily to-do list: survive corporate curiosity. Daniel noticed it differently. His assistant began over-explaining the schedule, HR smiled at him like they knew something he didn't, and one board member jokingly asked whether the company had added romance to its benefits package. Daniel laughed in all the appropriate places while silently realizing that nothing escaped an office full of board professionals with Wi-Fi access. The situation escalated during a strategy meeting that should have been entirely forgettable. Emma presented her ideas clearly and confidently, standing at the front of the room with a calm focus that made Daniel proud in a way he was not supposed to feel. When she finished, the room applauded, and Daniel nodded, preparing to move on, until someone spoke. Great presentation, a senior manager said. Must be nice having direct access to feedback. The room went quiet. Emma blinked once, then smiled politely. I prepare like everyone else, she said. Coffee free. A few people laughed, unsure why. Daniel cleared his throat. Let's stay focused, he said evenly, shooting the manager a look that suggested this topic had officially expired. After the meeting, Emma retreated to her desk, irritation simmering beneath her professionalism. She hated the implication, hated the way her work suddenly felt like it needed defending. Daniel felt it too, the unfairness of it, the way something genuine was being reduced to whispers and raised eyebrows. That evening, Daniel made a decision that felt both necessary and terrifying. He asked Emma to talk, not in his office, but in a quiet cafe across the street where no one cared who they were. They sat across from each other, coffee carefully placed at a safe distance, and finally said out loud what they had both been thinking. This is getting complicated, Emma said. Yes, Daniel replied. And not because of us. She nodded. I don't want to be a rumor. I worked too hard for that. So did I, he said. And I won't let your work be questioned because of me. They talked longer than planned, not arguing, but laying everything out with honesty either of them had expected to find so easily. Daniel offered solutions that respected boundaries. Emma offered patience that surprised even herself. Neither wanted to walk away, but neither wanted to lose themselves either. When they finally stood to leave, there was a pause, heavy but calm. "This doesn't end tonight," Emma said quietly. "No," Daniel agreed. "But it doesn't end us either." They walked back to the office together, not touching, not hiding, simply existing side by side with a new understanding. The whispers didn't stop overnight, but something else started to grow stronger in their place. Trust. And for the first time since the coffee incident, both Emma and Daniel felt certain that whatever happened next would be faced deliberately, not accidentally spilled into their lives. The final turning point arrived quietly, without drama, without spilled drinks or raised voices, which somehow made it more powerful than any grand gesture could have been. Weeks passed after their honest conversation, and during that time both Emma and Daniel did exactly what they had promised each other. They worked. They kept boundaries. They treated each other with the same respect they demanded from everyone else, even when it would have been easier to blur the lines and pretend the tension did not exist. The office slowly adjusted. People found new topics to whisper about. Productivity reclaimed its place as the main obsession, and Emma's work began to speak louder than any rumors ever had. Her ideas were implemented. Her projects succeeded. Her confidence became something people relied on rather than questioned. Daniel watched all of this with a quiet pride he kept carefully hidden behind professionalism, knowing that the best support he could give her was space to shine on her own terms. One evening, after a long but successful presentation to investors, Daniel stood alone in his office, staring out at the city lights. For the first time in years, success felt complete, not because of numbers or approvals, but because he had finally learned how to choose integrity over convenience. He picked up his phone, hesitated, then sent a simple message. "Dinner? No coffee involved. Promise." Emma read it while packing up her bag, smiled to herself, and replied, "Deal." They met at a small restaurant far from the office, a place where no one cared who they were or why they were there. The conversation flowed easily, free from pressure, free from unspoken rules. They laughed about the absurdity of their beginning, about how close they had come to missing each other entirely, and about how strange it was that something so clumsy had led to something so steady. "This started as the worst morning of my life," Emma said, stirring her drink carefully. "And became the best accident of mine," Daniel replied. This time, there was no hesitation. No fear. No audience. Just two people who had earned the right to choose each other honestly. Months later, nothing about their relationship felt rushed or reckless. It felt intentional. The company thrived. Emma was promoted on merit no one could question. Daniel learned how to leave work on time and discovered that success did not lose value when shared. On one perfectly ordinary morning, Emma wore a white dress again, walked beside Daniel through the city, and smiled when he instinctively reached for her coffee before she could. "Careful," she said, amused. "I know," he replied. "I've learned." Sometimes the best love stories do not begin with romance, but with chaos, timing gone wrong, and two people choosing to handle it better than expected. And sometimes, the happiest endings are not loud or dramatic, but quietly earned, one honest decision at a time. As the author of this story, I see it not just as a romantic comedy, but as a reminder that life rarely begins according to plan. Sometimes the most important turning points happen exactly when everything goes wrong: coffee spills, moods collapse, anger and confusion appear. Yet it is in these awkward and chaotic moments that people reveal who they truly are, not through status or job titles, but through their reactions, honesty, and ability to take responsibility. This story teaches the viewer that coincidences are not always random, and that first impressions can be misleading. It is about standing up for yourself, not allowing circumstances or someone else's position to diminish your work, while still remaining open to feelings. The characters do not run from difficulties. They choose respect, boundaries, and honesty, and that is what makes their happy ending truly earned. What do you think? If you were in the heroine's place, would you be able to see an opportunity in the worst morning of your life?